The Billionaire's Hidden Wife. Chapter 1. It wasn't a wedding anyone would remember. There was no music, no guests, no celebration, just a room filled with silence and tension thick enough to choke on. Ella sat quietly on a wooden chair at the corner of a legal office in the city, her hands folded tightly on her lap, a pen trembling between her fingers. She wore a plain white dress her aunt had sewn for her the week before. No lace, no veil, no makeup. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her lips trembled every time she tried to breathe. Across the table sat Liam Blackwood, rich, powerful, untouchable. He didn't spare her a glance. He was too busy tapping on his phone, his signature already scribbled on the marriage certificate without a second thought. To him, this was paperwork. Just another deal. Just another line in a long list of things to check off. Ella had been silent for most of the drive into the city that morning. Her stepfather had told her firmly, "You'll marry him, and that's final. You don't have to love him. Just do what's expected, and you'll be taken care of." Those words repeated in her head like a warning. She didn't know Liam. Not really. She had only seen him twice before the wedding. Once during a charity event in her village where he barely said 2 words, and again when his lawyer had come to finalize the terms of the marriage. No one asked her if she wanted this. No one cared. When it was her turn to sign, Ella's hand shook. The lawyer placed a soft hand on her shoulder and whispered, "It's just a signature, sweetheart." But it didn't feel like just a signature. It felt like giving up a piece of herself she'd never get back. Once it was done, Liam stood up without looking at her and walked out of the room. She followed quietly, her suitcase in one hand and the weight of everything else in the other. The drive to his estate was long and cold. Neither of them spoke. The rain began as they approached the gates. The mansion was the kind of place she had only ever seen in magazines, tall, gray, and intimidating. Iron fences wrapped around the estate like it was guarding something sacred. As they pulled into the driveway, Ella stared out the window and felt her chest tighten. This wasn't a home. This was a warning. The driver opened the door. Ella stepped out, clutching her small bag, rain already soaking through her thin dress. Liam walked ahead, not bothering to wait. Inside, everything was silent. Too silent. Polished marble floors. Expensive artwork. Wide staircases. Chandeliers that looked like they had never been touched. And in the middle of it all, Liam's mother, Eleanor Blackwood. She stood at the top of the staircase with a glass of wine in hand and a sneer on her lips. "So," she said slowly, eyes scanning Ella from head to toe. "This is what the board expects you to marry? She looks like a servant." Liam didn't answer. He simply said, "Put her in the far guest room. I have meetings." Then he walked away, leaving Ella standing there like unwanted furniture. Eleanor approached her slowly, sipping her wine. "Listen carefully, little girl. You don't belong here. I don't care what deal was made or what name is on that certificate. You are not a Blackwood. You never will be." Ella nodded, lips pressed tight. That was her first night as a wife. The guest room was small and windowless, like a storage unit that had been cleaned out for her arrival. No warmth, no welcome, just a bed, a blanket, and silence. She didn't cry that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how her life had changed so quickly and so cruelly. Days passed. No one spoke to her unless it was to give instructions. She wasn't allowed near Liam's office. She wasn't allowed to eat with the family. She wasn't introduced to anyone. She was expected to stay hidden, like a shameful secret buried under gold and marble. The staff treated her like an outsider. Some whispered behind her back. Some mocked her accent. Others pretended she wasn't there. She ate alone. Most days, cold leftovers. Some days, nothing at all. Once, when she tried to ask for more tea, the cook slammed the kettle down and said, "Ask your husband to buy you a maid." Liam? He barely came home. And when he did, he brought with him the scent of perfume and alcohol. Ella could hear him on the phone, laughing with women, flirting shamelessly. He never looked at her. He never asked how she was. To him, she was furniture. A ghost. One evening, she walked into the hallway to find him kissing another woman at the door. He didn't even bother to stop when he noticed Ella standing there. The woman looked at her and laughed. "Oh," she said, brushing her hair over her shoulder. "This must be the charity case." Ella didn't speak. She just turned around and went back to her room, locking the door behind her before collapsing to the floor. That night, she cried into her pillow until her throat hurt. But no one came. No one ever came. Eleanor's words were worse. "It won't be long," she'd say casually over her morning coffee. "The board will approve the expansion, and Liam will dump you. You'll be sent back to wherever you came from, maybe with a check if you're lucky." Once, Liam said it to her face. "I don't love you," he said coldly after she accidentally bumped into him in the hallway. "I never will. You were a name I needed to move forward. That's all. Don't expect anything else." She stared at him, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. She went back to her room. She curled into herself. And she stayed quiet. Weeks turned into months. The pain didn't fade. It grew heavier. She stopped asking questions. She stopped trying to smile. She learned how to move without being seen, how to breathe without being heard. And slowly, she stopped feeling like a person. She was just there, trapped in a house where no one wanted her, married to a man who wished she didn't exist, surrounded by wealth that didn't belong to her, and carrying the weight of a silence that was slowly killing her. She didn't know how much longer she could last, but she also didn't know how to leave. Because where does a forgotten girl go when no one remembers she was ever there? Chapter 2. Mornings in the Blackwood mansion were cold, not because of the weather, but because of the people. The giant chandelier sparkled above Ella's head as she moved barefoot across the marble floor, clutching a tray of breakfast she had just prepared. She wore a faded, oversized sweater and loose pants that barely fit her, not out of choice, but because nothing had ever been given to her since the day she entered the house as Liam Blackwood's wife. Not even a simple dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the tray down in the grand dining room, where Margaret Blackwood, Liam's mother, sat at the head of the table like a queen. Late again, Margaret muttered without looking up, flipping through a glossy magazine. "Do you think you're doing us a favor living here, you village brat?" Ella stood quietly, head bowed. No words. She had learned long ago that replying would only make things worse. Margaret's eyes finally met hers, and with a sharp tone, she added, "You should be grateful we even allow you to breathe under this roof. My son could have had any woman in this city, models, actresses, heiresses. But look at you, a nobody." Ella swallowed the lump forming in her throat and forced herself not to cry. She couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her with kindness. Not in this house. "You were supposed to clean the study last night." "I found dust on the shelves this morning," Margaret snapped. I cleaned it," Ella said, her voice almost a whisper. "Then you're blind and lazy," Margaret snapped, slamming the magazine shut. "Clean it again. And this time, do it properly. Or don't bother coming down for dinner." Ella turned to leave, carrying her shame like a second skin. As she walked back through the long hallway, she passed Liam's office door. She paused for just a second. Maybe, just maybe, he'd notice her. Maybe today he'd say something. Anything. But the door stayed shut, like always. Liam Blackwood was a name that echoed across headlines. Billionaire. CEO. Cold genius. Women dreamed of him. Men envied him. But to Ella, he was a stranger who shared her last name. She still remembered the day they got married. A quiet ceremony, no guests, no photos. He hadn't even looked her in the eyes. Just signed the papers and left. No kiss. No smile. No warmth. He made it clear from the beginning. This wasn't love, it was an arrangement. One he didn't want, but had been forced into by his late grandfather, who had loved Ella's father. His grandfather had made Liam promise to marry Ella, and Liam had agreed to honor the old man's dying wish, but with bitterness written all over his face. Since then, he barely spoke to her. He came and went as he pleased. Nights passed with her sleeping alone in the guest room, while he stayed out late or locked himself away in his private suite. Sometimes, Ella wondered what would happen if she disappeared. Would he even notice? Would anyone? The answer always felt the same, no. That night, the storm came hard. Rain slapped against the windows as lightning lit up the sky in flashes. Ella sat curled in a corner of her room, hugging her knees. She hadn't eaten all day. Her stomach ached, but it was nothing compared to the hollowness inside her chest. She remembered the sound of laughter once, her father's warm chuckle, her mother's gentle voice humming lullabies. But those memories were fading fast. Ever since her parents died in the accident, everything had turned dark. Alone and grieving, she had been taken in by the Blackwoods, only to be used, insulted, and ignored. Suddenly, the door burst open. It was Liam. She stood up quickly, shocked. He never came to her room. But his eyes weren't soft. They were sharp and distant. "My mother says you embarrassed her today," he said coldly. Ella's mouth opened, but no words came out. "She said you were disrespectful, that you talked back." I didn't, she said, voice shaking. Liam stepped closer. I don't care. Whatever she says, I believe. You live here because I allow it. So do yourself a favor, Ella. Keep your mouth shut and stay out of the way. With that, he turned and left. She sat back down slowly, her chest tight, eyes burning with tears she didn't want to shed. She had tried so hard to be invisible, to not cause trouble, to endure quietly. But even silence wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough for them. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. No one had ever listened. That night, as the storm raged on outside, Ella cried without making a sound. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just let the tears fall slowly, soaking into her thin blanket. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. Not broken yet, but it was close. And she wondered, how much longer could she survive in a home that felt more like a cage? Chapter 3. Ella stood silently by the bedroom window, watching the cold rain smear against the glass. It was past midnight, yet Liam hadn't come home. Again, she no longer asked where he went, who he was with, or if he would return. There was no point. Questions only earned her a scowl or a cruel remark. The Blackwood mansion was vast, but Ella felt like a ghost trapped within its icy walls. Her footsteps made no sound, her voice never echoed, and her presence was barely acknowledged. She had tried, oh, how she had tried, to be the kind of wife anyone would be proud of. She cooked, cleaned, served meals at the right time, and greeted Liam with quiet respect. But all of it fell flat. His eyes never softened when they looked at her. The housekeeper, Grace, once whispered to her, "You're too gentle for this place, dear. This house is made of ice, and you're burning quietly inside." But even the kindness in Grace's words couldn't melt the chill that Liam's mother, Mrs. Blackwood, brought with her every morning. "Ella," she would bark the moment she descended the stairs. "What is this mess? You expect my son to eat this? Do you think you were brought here to laze around?" Ella would bow her head, take the plate, and return to the kitchen to cook again. No one ever ate the second meal either. But Mrs. Blackwood was never truly hungry, only for reasons to degrade her. "You don't belong here," she hissed one day when Liam wasn't around. "You think being his wife means you're his equal? You're just a filthy girl from the village. Don't think I don't know what your kind really wants, money, status. You're nothing." Ella said nothing. She never did. But that night, she cried in the laundry room, biting into a towel so her sobs wouldn't be heard. Her tears soaked the fabric until her eyes ran dry. Liam had promised her nothing when they got married. It was a rushed ceremony, no guests, no vows, no smile. Just a signature and silence. He needed a bride, and she was convenient. The night of their wedding, he didn't even look at her as he handed her a separate room key. "Don't expect anything from me," he said coldly. "This is business. Stay out of my way." She had nodded, too stunned to feel the weight of the humiliation then. It settled later, day by day, moment by moment. He never introduced her as his wife. Not to his friends. Not to the media. Not even to his staff. She was just Ella, the girl who cooked and cleaned. A servant with a ring. Every time he brought women into the house, she hid. Not because he asked her to, but because she knew her place. One time, she forgot to move fast enough. She saw the girl clinging to Liam's arm, giggling, lipstick smeared across his neck. Their eyes met. Liam's expression was cold, unreadable. "She's the help," he muttered. "Ignore her." Ella had barely made it back to her room before she collapsed on the floor, clutching her chest. The pain wasn't sharp. It was dull, constant, like a bruise that never healed. One evening, she gathered the courage to speak. He was sitting in the study, reading something. She stood by the doorway, hands trembling. "Liam," she said softly. He didn't look up. "What?" She swallowed. "Why did you marry me if you hate me this much?" He closed the book, leaned back, and finally met her gaze. His eyes were ice. "You think I had a choice? My grandfathers will had conditions. You were just the easiest way to meet them. Don't confuse necessity with affection." Something inside her broke. She nodded, turned around, and walked away. That was the last time she asked him anything. After that, she became invisible. She stopped eating meals with them. She stopped smiling. Her voice grew quieter. Her steps smaller. She sometimes stared at herself in the mirror and wondered who the girl looking back was. The light in her eyes was gone. Her skin, once warm and golden, looked pale. But the worst nights were the silent ones, when the whole house slept, and she lay awake, wondering what she did wrong to deserve this life. She remembered her father's hands, rough from work, yet gentle when he'd hold hers. "You're a gift," he used to say. "One day someone will see that." But no one did. Not Liam. Not his mother. Not this house. Ella's life had become a long, endless winter. And she was standing in the cold with no coat, no fire, and no one to pull her inside. As the wind howled against the window that night, she sat on the floor of her empty room, hugging her knees, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. No one would come for her. Not even him. Chapter 4. The air in the Blackwood mansion was always cold, even in the middle of summer. Not because of the weather, but because of the way people looked at her, especially her mother-in-law. Ella stood quietly in the hallway, her eyes lowered as she waited for Mrs. Blackwood to finish her phone call. She knew better than to interrupt. She had done that once before, months ago, and the slap that followed had taught her to never do it again. "I don't know what spell that girl cast on my son," Mrs. Blackwood hissed into the phone, pacing in front of Ella as if she wasn't even there. "She's nothing but a stain on our name. I'll make sure she doesn't last here." Ella clenched her hands behind her back, fingernails digging into her skin just to keep the tears at bay. Every word pierced her, but she stayed silent. That was her only way of surviving, swallowing the pain, wearing it like a second skin. When the call ended, Mrs. Blackwood turned to her with that same sneer she wore every day. "Still standing there like a statue?" she snapped. "Go make yourself useful. The kitchen's a mess, and I'm not about to waste money hiring more staff just because my son decided to marry a beggar." Ella nodded once and turned away, but not fast enough to hide the way her eyes shimmered. She walked quietly, her steps light, as if any sound would trigger more anger. That was the rule in this house: be invisible or be punished. She reached the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The mess wasn't hers, but it always became her responsibility. The maids had learned quickly that Ella would never defend herself, so they left things for her to clean: spills, broken dishes, and even their own chores. She was the billionaire's secret wife, but in this house, she was nothing more than the maid. Her hands were red and raw from scrubbing. Her body ached from hours of standing. But worst of all was the loneliness. Days went by without hearing Liam's voice. He hadn't come home in 4 nights. And even when he did, he treated her like air: no words, no eye contact. Just silence and slamming doors. Once, she had dared to ask him, "Why did you marry me if you hate me this much?" His cold laugh had echoed in her ears for days. "Do you think I had a choice?" Those words haunted her more than any slap, more than any insult. They reminded her that her presence here was a favor, something she should be grateful for, even if it destroyed her. Later that night, Ella prepared Liam's dinner and set it out, just in case he came home. It was past midnight, and the house was dark except for the single light she left on in the dining room. She sat on the staircase, waiting, her head resting on her knees. The door finally opened, and Liam walked in, reeking of expensive cologne and someone else's perfume. He didn't even glance her way. She stood up, her voice trembling as she said, "I made your favorite." "I." He cut her off with a sharp look. "Don't wait up for me. I didn't ask you to." Then he walked past the untouched food and straight up the stairs. Her hands dropped to her sides. The food sat there, steaming quietly, unwanted. Like her. She stood there for a while, the silence so loud it rang in her ears. Then slowly, she packed the food back into the containers. It was a routine she had gotten used to: cook, wait, be ignored. On her way to the kitchen, she bumped into a photo frame hanging crooked on the wall. It was one of Liam and his family. She wasn't in it. She never was. There were no pictures of her in the house. No one would ever know she lived here. She looked at her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, cracked lips, a bruise forming at the edge of her jaw from an accidental bump against the door. But it looked too deliberate to be an accident. She touched the bruise gently, then turned off the light. The next day was no better. Mrs. Blackwood accused her of stealing a bracelet. The maid had misplaced it, but Ella was the easiest target. She probably wanted to sell it back in her filthy village, the woman said, waving the bracelet in the air once it was found in the laundry bin. "I won't tolerate thieves in this house." Ella stood there, her head bowed, while the other maids snickered quietly. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Mrs. Blackwood spat. "No, ma'am," Ella whispered. The slap was swift and loud. Her ears rang for minutes after, but no one looked surprised. It was just another day in the mansion. When Liam came home that night, she wanted to tell him, just once, what his mother was doing. But as he brushed past her without a glance, she knew it was pointless. He wouldn't believe her. Or worse, he wouldn't care. She went to bed hungry that night. No one had saved her a plate. Not that they ever did. Lying in the cold, empty bed, she curled into herself, clutching her pillow like it was the only thing that wouldn't hurt her. Her tears soaked the fabric, silent and endless. And still, she didn't scream. She didn't run, because she had nowhere to go, and no one waiting for her. Chapter 5. Ella stood outside the tall iron gate, her hands trembling, the wind biting through her thin shawl. She stared at the mansion she had lived in for months, a place that never felt like home. It looked grand from the outside, but to her, it was nothing but a golden cage, cold and cruel. The driver who brought her from the village had long driven off. Liam hadn't returned her call. She didn't even know if he was inside. Still, she pressed the buzzer, hoping someone would let her in. Moments later, the gate creaked open, and she walked in slowly, dragging her luggage behind her like the weight of her shame. Inside, the house was eerily silent. She stepped into the living room, and her eyes met Margaret's, Liam's mother. The woman who had humiliated her in front of the maids, made her scrub floors, wash toilets, and serve like a common servant. Her stomach turned, but she kept her head down respectfully. "You're back," Margaret said coldly. "Didn't think you'd have the face to return after embarrassing this family." Ella stood frozen, her fingers tightening on the handle of her suitcase. I didn't mean to embarrass anyone," she whispered. "Liam told me to leave, so I—" "Don't talk back," Margaret snapped, stepping closer. "You think just because you wear that ring, you're his wife? Let me remind you, this marriage was nothing but a favor to your family. Don't think it gave you a title." Ella's lips trembled, her voice caught in her throat. "I never asked for this marriage." "Exactly," Margaret said, scoffing. "And Liam never wanted it either. He pities you, Ella. You should thank him for putting up with you." The words hit her harder than a slap. Just then, Liam came down the stairs. He stopped when he saw her, as if surprised she had come back. "You're here," he said, expression unreadable. She nodded slowly. "You told me to return." He looked away. "That doesn't mean I missed you." Margaret smirked and walked away, leaving her alone with him. Ella stood there, feeling like a shadow in his home. He didn't step forward. He didn't ask how she was. His eyes scanned her, but they were empty. "I'll be staying in the guest room," he muttered and walked past her, brushing her shoulder without a second glance. Later that night, Ella lay in bed wide awake, her pillow damp from silent tears. The house was quiet, but her heart throbbed with pain. She missed her parents. She missed feeling seen, loved, safe. But in this house, she was invisible. She heard footsteps outside and stiffened. The door opened. It was Margaret. She didn't knock. "Wake up," the woman barked. "You don't get to sleep in like royalty. The bathrooms need cleaning. I want this entire place spotless by morning." Ella sat up, confused. "It's almost midnight. And you came back here for free food and a roof? Then earn it." Too tired to fight, too defeated to protest, Ella got up and followed the woman out. She cleaned for hours, scrubbing the floor on her knees until her hands turned red and her back ached. The house was so large, it felt like punishment crafted just for her. The next morning, Liam was already dressed for work. He didn't even look at her when he walked past the kitchen where she was peeling vegetables for breakfast. "Don't burn anything," he muttered coldly. She bit her lip and nodded. "I won't." He paused, then added with a cruel twist of his lips, "Try not to embarrass me." Again, her heart sank. Later that day, she overheard Margaret on the phone, laughing. Yes, she came crawling back. Poor thing still thinks she's a wife. She doesn't know Liam is planning the divorce once this contract ends. Ella's blood ran cold. Divorce? Contract? What contract? She stumbled backward, bumping into a table. The clatter drew Margaret's attention. "Eavesdropping now?" Margaret snapped. "You really have no shame. What contract?" Ella asked in a faint voice. "Oh, please," Margaret rolled her eyes. "You thought this was real? You think a man like Liam would ever marry someone like you without a reason?" Ella stared at her, heart pounding. Margaret smiled cruelly. "This marriage was a business agreement. A temporary fix. You were never meant to stay." The world spun around her. She rushed to her room, locked the door, and collapsed to the floor. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. So everything had been fake. Every cold stare. Every cruel word. Every silence. He never planned to keep her. The ring on her finger felt like a chain now. She tore it off and stared at it, her eyes blurry with tears. She had given everything, her trust, her innocence, her dignity. And all along, She had been nothing but a placeholder. She curled into herself and cried, deep, painful sobs that made her chest ache. There was no comfort, no one to run to. Just four cold walls and the sound of her own heartbreak. That night, she didn't sleep. She simply stared at the ceiling, wondering how much longer she could survive in a place where she was nothing but a mistake.